Great, so I'd like to invite up the first speaker of the affirmative team to open today's debate.
The injustices of the past are often a dark memory for many countries, a haunting reminder that strikes deep at their roots. Although forgotten by some, such injustices remain present in our society today, failing to fade away at a rate which many would desire. As the affirming team today, our principal framework will be as follows. By spending on current inequalities, we even out and stabilize current society, providing better outcomes and opportunities for all citizens across all socioeconomic spectrums. We will prove that on our side of the house, government expenditure on rectifying current inequalities will not only have the direct benefits of the spending, but will also indirectly target inequalities inherited from the past. So in our model, we support more initiatives to rectify current inequalities, for example, in the police force and in education, as well as social policies aimed at uplifting the working class and reducing wealth disparity in society. So for my first point, how our side of the house has a more well-rounded approach. So many of the current inequalities in society are as a result of the past. This forms the underlying basis of this point. These injustices are deeply ingrained both in the values of society as well as the values of the government. So beginning with society, the attitudes towards minorities and other parts of the population are passed on throughout generations, right? They aren't just forgotten, as many of us would like to think. They're just because times have changed. For example, in the US, society which was facilitating of segregation, only 2 generations ago, right? That's your grandparents, for example. And such views are passed on. They still make up values, and to suggest that these are simply forgotten simply wouldn't make sense. So this shows that even in the current day, discrimination towards minorities still will exist. Now, quickly, I'd like to talk about the government as well in this aspect. So, for example, again, in the US, being formed and structured during in and around times filled with injustice, formed around slavery and the use of black servants and slaves and oppressed, used as labor and as a class. So this shows a direct correlation between race and class, and it continues to exist in the current day. So what does this really mean? Well, current inequality, what I've proven to you, is that it has a direct correlation toward the injustices of the past. So that by spending to rectify current inequalities, governments are also targeting the results caused by the injustices of the past. These two aspects are unique to our side of the house. We are addressing both aspects of this. So we're addressing the current inequalities as well as the injustices of the past. And Nick have to come up here and prove that compensation on the basis of injustice isn't provided, compensation on the basis of injustice on the negating side of the house isn't provided on the basis of any current need at the moment, right? Even if the negating team can prove the benefits of directly compensating for the injustices of the past, on our side, we're addressing current social inequalities and therefore the injustices of the past, which have directly resulted and reflected on this. That is what my substantive point has been proving throughout. So we have we are providing for those impacted by the injustices of the past, and those who are who have been at odds and are in and for those another aspect of this is those who are beating the odds, right, and are in higher socioeconomic positions within society, regardless of the injustices of the past, right? We are not, in this sense, on our side of the house, we are not providing unnecessary financial payments which wouldn't be of the same effects to these individuals who are of a higher socioeconomic status, right? Again, that is a unique benefit to our side of the house, right? Because NEG is going to come up here, they're going to tell us that they're going to compensate for everything in the past, but not without directly being able to address the current aspects of society at the moment. So that is our unique benefits which we have on our side of the house. Now, my second substantive, that being the reduction of racism in society. So for this, we have we have to step in the shoes of a white working class person, right? Working hard to provide for themselves and for their family, right? The old 9 to 5, living paycheck to paycheck, providing for themselves and their children, for example. And then we've got to think of a situation in which these same white working class individuals are seeing a well-off, wealthy person, or even someone else in the same position of as them, but being assisted by the government on the basis of race or on the basis of minority, compensating for things which have been way back in the past, right? A past which the same working class white individual didn't have any part in and didn't have any choice in determining such injustices. And so then we must ask what would this actually cause, right? These white working class individuals will feel outraged and cheated. Another person is being assisted and they're not, simply due to something which they didn't have any part in the past. So you can clearly see where this leads, right? The outcomes of all of this is that these same white, working class individuals are going to develop an extreme distaste for these other people, right? Who they're seeing gaining assistance on the basis of race. They're going to feel inclined to actively discriminate against these minorities, which these same minorities which the negating side are supposedly going to benefit, right? And then this is only going to result in more racial division, less harmony, and it's just overall going to lead to a destabilization of society. So now I'd like to invite any POIs.
If a white working class person really hates systemic racism that much, why would they not also hate people who are committed and seems to reload on the government?
Right. The issue with this is that it is a direct correlation to the past, not in the same way that the benefit is. The benefit is addressing current social inequalities, whereas what the negating team is suggesting we must do is we must provide for what has happened throughout the past, right? That is where that is the underpinning outrage which I pointed out in the substantive over and over again, is that these white working class individuals are going to be outraged by compensation for the past, for things that they didn't take part in. So what we've got on our side here today is the unique benefits which come with directly targeting inequality, how this actually has this unique correlation to the past, right? Due to these inequalities being being inherited throughout the generations, being systematic within the government, right? So we've got this unique standpoint in which we can address current issues as well as addressing the issues of the past, which have a direct correlation. We've got both these sides. We show how we can create a much more stable, much more a society with much more harmony, as opposed to one which is only going to generate division for those which the negating team want to help so badly. Very proud to affirm.
The affirmative side's suggestion that the assimilation of Aborigines culture in Australia, the stealing of land, and the destruction of a people can be fixed through financial means only is absolutely preposterous. We think that part of rectifying the past is apology, is about giving back land that has more than just financial significance. And we think that that is the most important thing in this debate today. 3 things that I'm going to talk about. Firstly, what do historical injustices and modern inequalities actually look like? Secondly, how we're able to actually get a larger change now as well. But thirdly, and most importantly, why we ought to address historical injustices. Today, we're going to win this debate by proving that we develop a more just society than the affirmative side of the House. But before I go forward, I'm going to give a couple pieces of rebuttal. So the first thing that we heard is that current inequalities solve historical things. But the problem with this is that they're only providing monetary incentives. If your land has been stolen and it has cultural significance, that's where your grandmother's died and your Mariah's there, we don't think that you actually want the money as much as you want to be able to live in your home again. We don't think that that actually solves the problem. Then we heard this line that rich people shouldn't be given money. We just want to say that rich people can suffer the harms of this as well. Their culture is the one that's being destroyed. Their livelihoods and their history is the one where they've had a genocide in the past or something along those lines. And we think that probably a lot of the time what matters more to them is the apology rather than the money. And they're probably not even going to take the money a lot of the time because they don't want nor need it. Second thing that we heard is that we're going to fix societal views. As brought to you in a POI, we think that this isn't actually realistic, because we think that a white person is more likely to understand why we should address something like a crime that has been committed, something that has legally been done wrong, and there is a physical, tangible problem, more so than giving money to somebody on the benefit where they may think they're just freeloading instead. And that moves me on to my first point. What do historical injustices and inequalities actually look like? So historical injustices are things that are not only immoral, but illegal as well. Think both now and then. The people who committed these injustices realize that they are these things. These are things such as Maori land theft. Land theft is never going to be legal, never has been, and it's a breach directly of the Treaty of Waitangi. And it's also things such as the Canadian Indigenous School that was uncovered a couple of days ago, where they found a mass grave of 200 people. This is an injustice that is always illegal, always immoral, and we don't think it can be fixed through finance. The second thing is, what are modern inequalities? Well, we think that these are things like poverty and oppression, but the root cause of them, as the affirmative side agreed, is historical injustices. For Black people in America, it is because they have been always disadvantaged by the ruling white class that they are in this position. If we are able to help them readdress their past problems, then we are able to help them lift up, and we have more support for this to fix these entrenched ideas. How do we get larger change? This is my second point. So just some context, as we've already talked about a little, what does rectifying these things actually look like? What we have on our side of the house is 3 main ways of doing this. We have an apology. This will be talked about a lot at second as well, but we think an apology is actually significant. It recognizes that something has been done wrong and that there is a tangible harm and that we can move forward and that we accept that it was bad. Secondly, though, is we can also give cash compensation for injustice effects. But we think that a lot of the time, cash is not also the most measurable, most effective measurement of harm. But thirdly, and probably most commonly, is we can give land back, right? We think that if it's stolen and it has that cultural significance, then we can do that. And this is exclusive because the affirming side of the house can only give out cash. They can only try and fix the current problems, which they're not even going to get support for. Why? I'm going to talk about that now. Why will they not get any support? Why will we get more support on our side of the house? And why will we have longer change? Okay, firstly, we get more buy-in on our side of the house compared to them. The average voter in the middle class is more likely to understand, especially in a white society where justice and law is such a key principle, why we should fix these wrongdoings when they can see that there is a legal breach of a contract. They don't understand why we should give money to people who need it on the benefit. They don't see why somebody who has taken drugs deserves this money, but they can see it if there is a tangible problem. They can see it if there was a genocide that these people have suffered and that they need help. We think that this means that we're able to get more political support for going forward into the future. This may mean that we're able to get more money out to these people if we are talking on financial needs. So that means that we give $5 million to Ngāi Tahu compared to $2 million to people on the benefit. But also this money is actually just as useful, right? Because it's more sustainable as well. The money that people, that Ngāi Tahu's getting is going straight back into their community, and it's being pumped into these people who are part of the modern day inequality, people facing inequality, because they are the people who have faced these historical oppressions which follow through. We think also that it's more sustainable, because land, if we're giving that back to them, is can be used to develop further economies going forward, right? You can use it for farming, tourism, renting, building houses. These are things that the affirmative side of the house can't get. But thirdly is big projects, right? If we're giving $20 million out to one group rather than $5 out to 20,000 people, we can build a hospital with that $20 million, and we can do more with it, more substantial projects compared to the affirmative side of the house, who can only have minor impacts to individual lives. We can have massive impacts to communities instead. The outcome is, assuming that both sides of the house can spend similar amounts of money, is that we have far more meaningful impact, and we're far more likely to get support for it. But even if we don't do this, why is it important that we address historical injustices? 3 reasons for this. Firstly is acknowledgement that something has happened. Sophie has more content on this later, but we think that it's actually reasonable to stand up in a modern society to be able to condemn things that have happened, and to suggest that maybe we don't stand by it. Maybe we share in the pain of these people, and we understand what they have gone through, and we support them through this process of moving forward. Secondly, though, is cultural significance. And this is mainly in terms of giving back land to people, which is a benefit that they can't get. Land has spiritual connection for a lot of these indigenous cultures in particular. They have massive connection to heritage. A marae has this spiritual connection where people feel connected to their culture, and it also gives them more purpose as well, right? They feel like they are part of something bigger. But simply, it's also land that's stolen, right? It's probably they feel that they have been unjustly oppressed. Their land has been taken away, and there isn't really a reason why they don't deserve it back. Why does somebody who has gone in with guns and stolen it deserve it over me, who has done nothing wrong, and my culture is being oppressed? Thirdly, though, and this is probably most important, is that we have a principle and moral importance to uphold the values of justice in our society. A crime was committed. When a genocide happens, no matter when it was, 200 years ago or today, it is illegal. It is something where people are facing immeasurable harms. To ignore it back then is also to say that it would be okay to happen today, that we don't have a problem with it occurring in our society. We want the affirmative side of the house to have consistency. They want to fix these genocides that are happening now. They want to fix injustices that are happening now. We think that injustices that happened in the past also matter. They also have significant impact on people's lives. And we, at the end of this point, have a benefit where we have a fairer society where people feel that they are always going to be valued, no matter which culture they're from, no matter what has happened in the past, and no matter who they are. At the end of this speech, we have more buy-in, we get more money out to these oppressed people, but we also recognise the pain and suffering of 200 years of oppression in these countries. Proud to stand.
On our side of the house, we're inclined to agree when they came up here and told us that sometimes apologies mean more than money, right? That's why we're perfectly happy to accept that this motion is focused on spending, right? Either side of the House can apologize for past brutalities. The focus is literally on where this government spending will go, where this money is going to. We are completely happy to support and apologize and actually redress all these social issues that have occurred in the past. And we agree with their side of the House that this is perhaps more important than financial incentives, right? We agree that perhaps the most important thing is actually to apologize for these things, to actually acknowledge them and put out statements addressing them. We agree completely with their side of the House. However, we would absolutely support our side of the House where we allocate spending towards addressing real current inequalities in the world today, not the ones that they want to address from hundreds of years ago on their side of the House, right? So 2 main points of clash here today. Firstly, on kind of who gets better outcomes and like going against racism, resisting racism, and then who gets better social outcomes at large for all of society, right? And then I'll be largely integrating this with my split point of how on our side of the House we unite the working class against racism. So just on this first point of racism, right, they told us that basically compensating historical injustice is a really good way to propel anti-racist movements. 2 main responses to you for this. Firstly, we told you that it actually inflames reactionary social sentiments in the working class, right, who are not recipient to these financial benefits that they're distributing on their side of the House. I'll address that in my split point. But secondly, as we brought you at first, because class and race are so intimately intertwined and connected, equalizing social policy that, helps poor people and working class people at large literally disproportionately helps people of color. Because we agree with their side of the House that these historical injustices have a flow-on effect to the modern day, where there's more likely to be Black people in poverty because of historical injustice, more likely to be, Indigenous people suffering in, poorly equipped reservations because of historical injustice. And on our side of the House, we literally still disproportionately help those people by addressing current financial and social inequalities in the world today, right now, right? Because what we see is that crime and things like that are often driven by poverty and material need, right? So we say that stereotypes that associate Black people with poverty, with being uneducated, with things like high crime rates, these are actually a result of these social conditions, right? And we say this social stigma can only be changed at the point at which we actually uplift these people, uplift the masses of working class and poor people that are suffering under the status quo by providing a change of them, actually offering opportunities and a financial change in their lifestyle, right? Only at that point can we achieve this. And not only do we get those benefits for these people of color on our side of the House, but we also don't have the disastrous consequences of alienating the white working class, right? So continuing on with that, they told us that money is not enough and morality is far more important than finance, and basically, first of all, we address in our model that we support redress of current inequality, right? We told you that we support equalization in institutions like police forces, police departments, education and schools, things like that. But secondly, because the motion is literally focused on spending, our side of the House is fully willing to support and fully supports apologizing for past illegal occupations, illegal confiscations and brutalities. We fully support, apologies and acknowledgements of past genocides and things like that. That is not a unique benefit on their side of the House, right? So we're perfectly happy to claim that we get that symmetrical benefit on either side of the House of the moral impact of this apology. But what do we actually get on our side of the House that is unique, right? Because they brought us this idea that they're going to get a larger change on their side of the House. They told us that the majority of white people can see the necessity of reparations and things like that, instead of, they're basically what they told us of giving welfare to druggies, right? Why is this completely wrong? First of all, in our model, we told you that we reverse financial inequality for the majority of people, right? So we told you that it would be a wealth transfer to not just unemployed, drug addicts, but it would also be to working class majority at large, right? So it's actually in the self-interest of these people. They're literally directly benefiting from these policies. They're going to fully support them, and they're going to fully support our side of the House. Why will they not support their side of the House? Well, at first, we gave you multiple lines of analysis as to how this literally produces resentment among working class and middle class white people, and they basically ignored all those lines of analysis on their side of the House, right? Because we told you how because of their own financial scarcity, their own pressures of, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to pay rent, they're not going to be very charitable when they see that other people who may even be well off than them, may actually be wealthy, receiving these reparations, receiving these financial transfers. We think it's absolutely ridiculous for them to claim that the vast majority of these white people who may be struggling themselves are going to suddenly embrace this far more than they embrace a policy that literally helps themselves, that literally provides money in their own pockets, right? Absolutely ridiculous on their side of the House. The next thing they told us is that people only act on things like this when they can see a tangible problem. And yeah, we say that's literally true, right? Their side of the House is the intangible one that's trying to provide financial incentives based on things from hundreds of years ago. Our side of the House actually ties it to the self-interest of these people and actually sees that, yes, it's benefiting poor Black people, it's benefiting myself. They actually do see the tangible benefits of this, and they're willing to support this type of policy. On their side of the House, they see no tangible benefits for themselves. They do not support this policy on their side of the House. They produce massive backlash and alienate people, right? And this brings me to my split of how we unite the working class against racism on our side of the House, right? Because their side of the house, they have compensation for historical injustice that is not provided on the basis of need, but from historical records, right? So this means well-off people who can trace their identities to minority groups that were treated unjustly will materially benefit. Why does this damage anti-racism? Two main mechanisms. Firstly, it alienates working class people not included in the compensation. Because today the negating team must stand for the denial of wealth equalization policies to struggling white workers, right? Because it literally says in the motion that this is what we're deciding, right? It's either excluded or not. So on their side of the house, they have to stand for less money going to these working class white people, right? It's just something they have to grapple with. Secondly, what is the result of this? We see that it's weaponized against anti-racism. So people that experience day-to-day struggles, living paycheck to paycheck, or even just living a middle-class lifestyle in a world where cost of living is steadily increasing and things like the pandemic have happened, people struggle to pay their bills and put food on the table, right? So they feel the need that they desperately need help from the government, right? They desperately need government aid themselves. And so when they turn on the TV and they say billionaires like Oprah opening up their envelopes full of cash, cash reparation payments, that's basically propaganda right in the hands of Fox News, right? If we're being very honest here, right? We're going to see a lot of resentment, right? We're going to see wealthy people getting taxpayer money due to their identity. So we see this as a fertile breeding ground for things like Fox News, basically the rise of more and more Donald Trumps around the world, and narratives that already occur right now, and they're just going to worsen, that things like racism doesn't exist, or that white people are victims of modern discrimination, That's basically confirmed on their side of the house, absolutely exacerbated completely on their side of the house. That's something they have to grapple with today. So not only do we avoid this absolutely catastrophic impact of basically enraging the majority of the population, but we actually unite the interests of the working class, right? Because when you're materially benefiting from this policy, a policy that disproportionately helps people of color, you're not going to go against it, right? They are going to go against a policy that only helps people of color, but when they see their own standard of living being increased, they're going to fully support something that also helps, their people of color, like in the working class as well. They're fully going to support that. They're not going to oppose it because they know it's in their own self-interest and actually helps them. They actually unite with these people instead of producing division on their side of the house. So that's how we get much better impacts on anti-racism on our side of the house. Now, moving on to this point of social outcomes, right? Because they brought us this pretty ridiculous idea that they're going to have far more meaningful impact on people's quality of life on their side of the house. They basically wanted to tell us that all we're going to do is give welfare to drug addicts, right? And then on their side of the house, they're going to build all these wonderful hospitals. We tell you that's basically what the model's literally talking about when it says rectifying current inequalities. It means building public hospitals for poor people. It means transferring wealth to actually working class people who may be fully employed but are struggling, It means actually rectifying these current inequalities in the world today, right? So they basically tried to mischaracterize our entire case, and not only did it not work, but it basically undermined their own case as well, right? Because we see on their side of the house, there's going to be less of this money going broadly into these public institutions that benefit all poor people at large, right? There's going to be less money going into specific public hospitals for everyone, education for everyone, and all of these institutions disproportionately help people of color on our side of the house. So not only do they fail to get the unique benefit of like the moral high ground of apologies from governments, and not only do they fail to get the unique benefit of actually addressing social improvement for people of color, but they actually alienate the vast majority of the population against their proposed policy. That's why we're incredibly proud to support this side of the house. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank us for your speech and line up the second speaker. When colonisers came and took Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' land, when they shot them into rivers where they would either die from bullet wounds or drowning because they didn't know how to swim, where the only people actually spared in these scenarios were young nubile girls who were later taken on to be raped and then killed, an apology saying I'm sorry isn't actually enough at that point in time. We think that they don't We think that it's actually incredibly harmful for this to be all Earth is able to get, because we think at the point in time where this land has been taken, it is so precious. We already told you why it is so culturally significant. We tell you that an apology is actually not quite enough, because an acknowledgement to say that it was bad is never going to get the same sort of action to actually like fix it for these people, to actually pull them out of the poverty cycles, because they had their children taken off them for generations and they never went to school, and they're all like, they struggle from extreme amounts of illiteracy. We're the only side of the house that's actually able to fix these really concrete problems. 3 things to address in my speech today. Firstly, how does each side actually like play into each other, and like what is more important? Secondly, who gets a larger amount of change? And then thirdly, why it needs to be done, like for those sort of principles, reasons, and why this is like a mutually exclusive benefit to our side of the house. Right, how does each side play into each other, and what's more important? Who did we say that we targeted under our side of the house? We target people with historical inequities, right? This looks like Indigenous people, it looks like people of colour, it looks like even women, or like the LGBTQ community. Why does this flow into everyone that they wanted to benefit? Because we tell you when the Indigenous illiteracy levels are so like high, it means that they were never able to get jobs, we're able to like pull them out of their cycles of poverty. When like trans people, for example, are like disproportionately homeless, right? When they've got like such bad mental health issues, we think that when we're able to target them, we're able to like pull them out of poverty and alleviate it to get like a vast majority of their benefits. And like the more important of their benefits, right? Why? Because these are the people who actually really need this help in today's society. And for these, and we think that as a result, we're able to alleviate these poverties and things like that, at least to the extent that they can. More on why later. But we're actually targeting the most important groups out of these sort of like subcategories, right? Why? Because we're leaving F, the only people we're leaving F to support, who like we literally can't co-opt, are people who aren't these victims of thousands of years of historical oppression, right? And we tell you that we're actually always happy under our side of the house, just like as per the motion, to be able to impact people by modern issues, right? Because we're the side that actually can stand for both. But even if we didn't, we tell you that it is so much harder to overcome thousands of years of historical and systemic oppression than it is to like overcome a COVID recession. But we tell you that we always care more about these people because they're so much more vulnerable, because the impacts on them are so much more significant than like providing an extra $3 to the working class. Right, who gets more change then? A few sort of things to cover in this point. Firstly, on buy-in. What we heard from side F was that like the white working class hates giving compensation to like people with problems, right? Few responses here. Firstly, we tell you that they just generally care about problems, right? Because when they see people who are like constantly, when they see like people of color on the streets who have like been victims of terrible cycles, they're always going to care because they have this sense of empathy, right? And they think that it is really sad when they see children on the street, right? We think that it is always going to be like a sense of political buy-in. Secondly, though, we think that a lot of these issues probably actually do impact them, because under this, like, we think the feminist issue for something is actually really relevant in this debate, right? We think that like we're able to provide a bit of like compensation or affirmative action to like the whole like to like all of the women who have been so disproportionately impacted by historical oppression, like as per this motion, right? More importantly, though, we think that if we are paying money to every single middle-class person, it's likely to just be like, what, an extra $3 to these people, right? We tell you that we like are able to probably stand for buy-in to to things like hospitals anyway under our side of the house, because we're able to stand for both, and we're actually really happy if this is like a large amount of money. It's actually something that we're willing to do because we think impacting these people is so important, right? We're able to get these funds from elsewhere. We think that we're more likely, right? But the more important comparison here is that like these white working class people are so much more likely to reject the benefits to like people who are homeless, who aren't victims of things like historical oppression. Why? Because under their characterization, these are hardworking people who like already have their own things to like pay, they're already paying rent, and it means they're going to be so much more angry. When the comparison here is literally, are we paying more money to like homeless people who like are the victims of like drug cycles, right? Who are probably going to be seen as freeloaders, who are going to be seen as like leeching off the government, who are going to be seen leeching off the like this white working class, right? We think that they're actually going to hate them a lot more, right? Whereas we think the comparison here is that they're always going to be far more willing to buy in to like a group of people that they think that they can see have been like disproportionately impacted by things like historical oppression, right? We think that's we're able to. Right, they're always going to like want to support them more. Secondly, though, and people from communities who don't need this compensation, right, which we heard was a point, 5 responses here. Firstly, we tell you this is such a small amount of people just due to like how oppressive like the systemic racism is, right? They think that it's actually really, really hard for them to break out of these cycles anyway, so this is a really small amount of people. Secondly, though, we tell you that regardless, these people probably have actually been impacted, right? Because even if they haven't even if they've been able to overcome it, right, they've probably felt this normalized racism of all levels of their journey, right? They've heard these racist comments, right? And we think that they're actually like fully deserving of some sort of compensation. Thirdly, though, most importantly, because these people can go back and help their communities, right? When they're able to get a bit more compensation, they're able to like get a platform to like do really, really well. They're able to bring it back to their communities and reap even further benefits that we wanted to talk about. Fourthly, though, because we're able to like give them this principal apology, we're able to like give this compensation to this like really, this community who really, really needs it. And that is the most important thing. I'll get onto that in my third point then. But then finally, though, we think that even at worst, we're still really happy to pay money to what is likely a really small amount of people, if that means. Sorry about that. Right, we're really happy to pay money to this like group of people who probably need it anyway. If like we need to give it out to a few people who probably don't need the money, if we're still able to impact people who need it, that's like really, really important. Finally, though, we're always able to get more money going out to these people. We gave you these mechanisms at Caleb, which have been insufficiently responded to. But we told you, because these are like a more sustainable, because we're able to like invest them in more sustainable projects, we give exclusively like back to the things like the land that are able to like continue to reap them these really, really important benefits. Insufficiently responded to, right? It means that they're able to be used for like farming, or they're like able to rent them out for tourist activities and like benefit them for like so many years to come, right? But thirdly on this, that we're able to like get them through big projects, right? Because we think that it's always going to be so much more efficient to give $20 million to like the First Nations than it would be to give like a few dollars to a couple of people in the working class, right? Right. Moving on to my last point now about why it needs to be done principally. This point here is like another path to victory for us, because even if because it proves that injustices are so extreme that even just the act of like focusing spending to like provide a bit of compensation is so meaningful that we can actually win off it alone. Why? Because this debate impacts people who are like the victims of colonization. It's like these people, the Torres Strait Islanders and the Aboriginal people in Australia, who were shot into rivers, who were killed, who were raped, had their children taken away from them and like taken by the government, and as a result have been pushed into cycles of illiteracy, into poverty, into gangs and homelessness. These are who we're impacting, because our side gets to actually put money into helping this, because this is an exclusive benefit for us, because we're able to like give them the land back. This is a cost that we think we're the only side of the house that is able to do this, because we're noting that something really, really bad has happened. We're taking accountability for the action, and because we're actually able to provide compensation that is probably a bare minimum anyway. We think that it's going to go so far in these communities, because otherwise the side after the house is taking this opportunity away. It's just spitting in their face and it's telling them that the government does not care about them. We do not stand for that. Incredibly proud to stand.
Now, I just want to start off by saying that there's actually two contradictions in the negative team's case. Well, the first one being that the first speaker came out here and they sort of said like an apology is really significant, like apology is enough for everyone. And then the second speaker came out and they told us that an apology is not enough. Well, that is a direct contradiction. And the second one being about how the first speaker talked about like white working class have like a sense of empathy. But then the next sort of thing they talked about was like they view poor people as freeloaders. Now, this is a second contradiction in their case, and I'll touch them a bit later, but that is really why that this case sort of falls apart due to the two main contradictions that sort of form their two biggest points. Now, there's two big points of clash in today's debate. The first one about like the compensation that this brings, and the second one being about what this actually looks like. Now, for the first point of clash, which is about the compensation that this brings. So what have we heard from the negative team? Well, we've heard this sort of like idea that like this money pulls them out of poverty, the poverty cycles, and they're stuck deep into poverty and they won't be pulled up. But the thing is, they've missed that under our side, under our side of the house, we do this far more successfully. You know, we're more broad-based, you know, public funding for institutions. It's more effective in lifting struggling communities out of poverty. You know, giving $10 million to a minority won't benefit the minorities and like the people who need it the most. You know, they won't have the best systems to actually do that. Whereas under our side of the house, we can use this and we can sort of benefit these people in a much better way than the affirmative team has tried to sort of like tell us. You know, so first of all, I want to take like a quick comparative. So like, what do we get under each side? Like under their side, what we get is we get like minorities getting some money, which won't last long. We get like people always wanting more. We get short-term, like a plaster solution, like $10 million that won't last long. And we get people giving backlash. Under our side, what we get is we get initiatives that help support them. We get apologies. We get this money going into programs that helps people today, not focusing on something that happened 50 years. You know, they brought up this idea about people like suffering from 50 years ago. But the thing is, under our side of the house, we are helping those people. This money goes directly into hospitals, schools, ways that help them better than just giving $10 million and hoping it fixes the problem. You know, we don't believe that giving $10 million to these people actually solves anything. You know, instead on focusing on current disadvantages will help society and these minorities. You know, also in the long term, this is a point that they've sort of failed to look at under their side of the case, is that in long term, you know, these people will actually start feeling like pretty stink because they got given $10 million. They've got a good relationship with the government. And then suddenly, like, they ask for something more. They say, hey, can you please help us with our land wars? And the government will say, well, no, we've already given you $10 million. So that's sort of like a false sense of friendship, a false sense of like, here, you're friends, we've solved the problem. And also like in 50 years, when somebody looks back on this genocide, they don't have the $10 million. They have nothing. You know, they might have like a small bedroom, but that doesn't mean anything to them. So it's not like they can have really long-term solutions that everyone's going to be happy. That is why under this point of compensation, why we have definitely sort of won that point and sort of, you know, knocked out all their ideas. Before that, I'll take a POI. Well, I'll touch on that a teeny bit later, but we don't believe that focusing on these disadvantages will fix the problems which you've pointed out, like people not having enough money or, you know, not being able to survive in these groups. We don't believe that giving them $10 million will fix the problem. Instead, it might make them have like a flat for like a couple months. We don't believe that it's actually solving the problem, which I'll touch on later on. So now for the second point of clash is what this actually looks like. So what have we heard from the negative team? You know, they talked about how like assisting people on like injustice for like the past. My first response to this is like, a lot of people who are affected by historical past are affected by social problems today. Like they are the ones who are like living on the benefit. They are the ones who are like living in small bedroom flats, you know. They're the ones who need the most help. And we don't believe that by giving $10 million to these minority groups, we will solve that. Under our side, they get the apology. You know, they've brought up this big idea about apology, you know, it means quite a lot. But we get that under our side. But as well, we get like current inequalities that these people are still facing will be fixed. You know, as Ronan pointed out, like Oprah and the CNN, you know, as soon as people see this sort of like this richer people of color getting these benefits, they're like, well, hold on a second. I'll touch on that a teeny bit later on. But they also talked about how like you can't, these things can't be fixed like through finance. Well, firstly, we don't believe that like focusing on like past disadvantages really solves anything in today's world. Like under their side, like they focused on people who are like poor, but they failed to look at how we get this under our side, like with hospitals and schools. So they've sort of lost this point under both sides of the house. So now to this point, which Ronan made a very good joke about before, which is about like the white society and like how they see this money being given to people due to like the genocide. So like, as Nick said, like he said in his first speech, that when like people of white people, like white working class people, see like people who are either like them or like better off than them, getting lots and lots of money through this like retribution plan, how do they react? Well, they don't react well because they think, why are you getting money for something I never had a part in? What makes you better than me? What makes you get $1 million and me nothing? That's where like the division comes. That's when they're like, the racism actually starts getting stronger because these people are getting more than these people because of something that happened 70 years ago. You know, they talked about how like money straight into lower economic minority groups when this like $10 million is given to this minority group. Well, first of all, we get this under our side. You know, we help the minorities and the people in lower socioeconomic situations. We don't believe that is beneficial or like unique under their side. So now for this like quick split point on like the awareness of racism, which the second speaker brought up, like he talked about how like, you know, awareness of racism and all sort of things like that. But we don't believe like it does make people more aware of racism, like this situation. Why? Because like the transaction doesn't always get publicly, which is sort of what Ronan and Nick have both talked about. So I believe that sort of falls out of the debate because we've run that throughout. You know, they've also talked about like the third speaker or the second speaker talked about how like under their side they'll build hospitals, under our side, you know, go straight to drug dealers, but they failed to really understand the moot. Like what spending on rectifying current disadvantages mean is helping society where it matters most. It means helping those people who need help and not giving it to people who don't need help just because they might like miss their land. But we believe that sort of creates divisions and sort of like often like an apology, as you said, is good enough. You know, what we're going to do is we're going to start initiatives to help these people. We're going to sort of like help them get together as a community, help them get into their culture instead of just giving them $10 million. We don't believe that is a solution that's going to last long. We don't believe that this plaster solution really helps anyone. So like under our side, what do we actually get? Well, the negative team has tried to position it that we just give like $10 million to drug dealers and sort of don't get anything else. But as we said, down the line, you know, we get an apology under our side. We get schools, we get hospitals. You know, it's not just going to these drug dealers. It's going to help these minorities who are in lower socioeconomic situations. It's going to help people who actually need the money. You know, we understand that like people under our side understand that like when they see this money going to these lower people, they understand because they can like, it might affect them or it might affect their friends. But when they see it going to like people who are like higher off or the same, you know, it sort of makes them think, well, hold on a second, I'm not seeing real tangible change. How come they are? Whereas under our side, they can see real tangible change, how it can affect them and their communities. And we believe that is highly beneficial. That is why the MOOC must stand. Thank you.
It seems quite strange that the F side of the House simultaneously hate the injustices that happen right now, hate injustice, they want to stop it, but they also do not care about the injustices of the past that they will never resolve because they are not resolving it at the expense of current inequalities, which are going to stay in society until we address the past inequalities, until we address the root of the problem. That is what our side does. 3 questions. Firstly, what's more important? Is it the economic benefit or is it the benefit to society and to justice? Secondly, which side achieves this greater social justice benefit? And then thirdly, on the economics. Firstly then, on what's more important. It necessarily must be the justice benefit because these people quite literally had their land stolen from them, were killed by government soldiers, had like literally, as Sophie told you, all of these different groups that had women being raped, children being killed and buried under their schools. This is abhorrent and we need to actually fix it. They don't ever fix it, we do. Secondly, it's because they can never fix it due to the fact that the model literally says to the exclusion. That means that they're not doing like some small changes to help. It means they're literally doing nothing. Think about how bad that looks when the government is just like, oh, we did this 200 years ago, it doesn't matter. But when it's the actual government that committed these atrocities, when they broke the treaty that they signed, that is so bad, and we need to stand for the justice system. This is because, like the government, 200 years ago, they burnt down this marae. We're the side that is going to pay for it to be built back. That is so important, not just for the social benefits that I'll talk about later, but also just for the principal justice benefit, that if we want to be some moral society, it's necessarily important for the government to actually address their past wrongs and to fix it. They can never do it. That's why we win. Secondly, then, on which side is going to achieve a greater social benefit? We heard three main claims from the F side of the House. Firstly, they told us that the apology is mutually exclusive, is not mutually exclusive. This is not true for two reasons. Firstly, it's because if you say sorry without actually rectifying anything, without doing anything, it just seems so disingenuous. We think it's actually going to be much worse if they give an apology without doing anything with it. But even if it's not, even if it isn't worse, even if it's just something that flattens out, it's still not enough. But it's so bad when it's just disingenuous because they're not actually trying to fix anything. They're just like, oh, this was bad, sorry. But because it comes from them, they actually have to do something to fix it to truly apologize. Their second claim then on the social benefit was that they're going to get white people angered, so there's going to not be any buy-in for our policy. Two responses. Firstly, we just think that these people are probably quite moral. They probably care about seeing the law being upheld. And that is so fundamental because it's when there is a broken treaty, when there is stolen land, these people that value law, that's a very Western ideal to care so much about justice and about law. These people, as they've tried to say, are white middle class. They probably do care about law, caring about these types of things. When there is this horrible atrocity that's been committed by the government, they probably do want to address it, and they actually are much more likely to buy into that than just seeing these supposed parasites on society being given free money. Because we need to be clear that the people that they are talking about are the middle class. They're not talking about white working class people. This is the actual middle class, because that's the main group in society, and if they somehow want to get a benefit from this point, it has to actually be a large group of people. What this means is that these people, they don't actually get any benefit under their policy. They've tried to say that they're going to get all of these people on board, they're going to unite the interests, but they're not going to be able to fix every single problem in society. They're not going to be able to give money to middle class people to resolve that injustice. That's never possible. Nobody's ever going to be able to do that on either side. What they are trying to do is give money to poorer people. So this middle class, they're not going to get any benefit. If they do, they get $5 in a stimulus check. That doesn't mean anything. They're probably not going to care. They're not going to actually unite their interests. So at the end of this, what it means is that they don't actually get all of these white people being angered. But what does happen, what the actual social benefit in this debate is that we tell these people that had their land stolen, we're giving it back. We tell these people that were literally murdered by the government, oh, we're going to address this. We're going to give you financial compensation to address to address the root of what is now the problem that causes them to be a lower socioeconomic status. I'll now take a POI.
At second, we were told that trans women and trans people are disproportionately seen and homeless. We were also told that, all these middle class and working class white people basically view these homeless people as social parasites. Can you explain this contradiction?
Well, yes, it's because most people that you're trying to help are going to be poorer people. We think that the perception of middle class people, of people that are at a financially stable position, the actual perception, not what actually happens, but the perception is that they're parasites. We're not saying that these people are parasites, but that's the perception that white middle class people have. Okay, moving on to the economic benefit then. What have they said? Firstly, they said that this is not going to be a long-term solution. They never actually gave us any mechanisms as to why theirs is long-term, but what they didn't, and what they also didn't do, was respond to the 4 mechanisms that we did give as to why it's a long-term solution. We told you that it's because we're able to pay for this land to be given back to these people. What that means is they now have an economic base that they can get all of these benefits from. If you don't have your land, you're never able to farm, you're never able to build houses and sell them or rent them or give them them to your people. You're never able to like set up tourism activities like Ngāi Tahu's been able to do because of a policy like our side of the house achieves. That's what we get. We give these people land that they're able to use for like the next 200, 300, 400, 500 years. What they do instead is if they actually want to help the poorest people in society, what they have to necessarily be doing is just giving out cash. We think that if they want to build a hospital, that probably benefits everyone. So that's something that we can do under our side of the house too. What they're doing is just like increasing the benefits, things like that. That is not a long-term solution, and it's not going to be nearly as effective anyway as giving out huge chunks of money, because that is what we try to do. That's what they tried to co-opt when they said they'll build these hospitals. But what we're actually able to do is we're going to be able to look and see, oh, Ngāti Porou, they had about $2 billion worth of damages. Let's give them $2 billion. What can they then do with this $2 billion? They can build heaps of hospitals. They can build heaps of schools. They can do all of these large projects where it's much more economically efficient, as opposed to just chucking out money where people now have an extra $50 and what they decide to do is go out for one nice meal. That does not have any long-term benefits. What we get is, because we get the land and we also get more efficiency by having large chunks. That's so important. If we care about the economic benefit, we win on that. But actually, we think it's just more important to address the wrong in society. They can never, and they have never shown why they address this wrong. We do. We are able to rectify the abuse from the government. That's crucial, because the government is taking action for it. They're giving money to rectify it. They're giving these people their land back, and they're giving a genuine apology. So proud to negate.
Two questions to ask yourself at the end of today's debate. Firstly, who gets more change? And secondly, who actually is able to compensate a community who really, really needs it? Right, a lot of things to jump into under who gets more change. Firstly, on who the working class actually would support more and like get the political capital for. Let's make this comparison really, really clear here, because apparently it just wasn't distinct enough for side F to actually like see what we were actually weighing up. We tell you that the working class is like weighing up helping victims, right? We tell you this is like because they know what slavery is. We tell you that they know that like what colonization was, and they're able to see them as direct outcomes, because these people actually are victims of it, because they're illiterate, because they were taken away from their parents and they were never put into proper schools, right? All of these sort of things, we think that the working class is able to see that they're actually victims of their circumstance. The comparison here, though, is that they're choosing between that and helping like freeloaders, right, essentially, because we think that the working class is always going to see like these people who are like homeless, right? Because these are the only people that we think that we can't actually impact under our side of the house, like people who are homeless for reasons that aren't due to things like colonization or like sexism, right? We think that the working class is always necessarily going to see them as freeloaders at the point in time where they chose to take those drugs, where they chose not to work, right? We think this actually was never a contradiction, because these trans people, because these black people are actually victims of the society, and they're the people, and the only other people that they get that we don't are people that we couldn't target, right? We think they're always going to see them as victims. Secondly, though, we think that it's more important to target these victims of systemic oppression anyway, completely regardless of political buy-in, because it is so hard for them to get out of it once they are in. Because they are victims of the situation, and because horrible things happen to their community that didn't happen to like the people that F wants to benefit, right? Because they're going through cycles. They're going through these cycles because they're going through gang cycles because they've resorted to it, because their parents were taken away from them because of the assimilation program, right? So much more important to target them, though. Third response on this, though, is that we can actually support both on the outside the house anyway, because F is the only side with this exclusive burden where they can only target one group, because they had to significantly focus on people who had like modern day injustices. We were always able to target both. We made it really clear that we wanted to prioritize the people who had who had these issues due to historical oppression, and we think that we're able to sufficiently do it. Finally, though, we're able to get more change because this money goes so much further under our side of the house, because their best case scenario is that they give a few extra dollars to like this random middle working class, right? We're really unsure why they actually needed it in the first place. We gave you so many reasons as to why our people needed it. But finally, because, but on this we told you it was because we were able to like give them sustainable projects, right? Because they were able to continue to like reap this money back from their land, because we were able to like give $20 million to a massive project, right? This still actually was never responded to. Hasn't been responded to since the last time I brought it up. So this like has to ultimately stand in this debate that our money would always go so much further. So finally, second question now. Who compensates this community who actually needs it? What did we hear from IF? We heard that they got this apology, right? And that on NEG we actually got this feasible change as a result of compensation, sorry. Why is this apology not enough? We made this really, really clear down our line. We told you that while an apology is nice, it's not actually something that puts people back in their jobs. We told you it's not something that gets people back on the land that their ancestors like owned, right? We told you that actually under their side of the house, this is like an incredibly fake apology, because firstly, there's probably like a significant cost to getting an apology, because it has to go through things like court systems anyway. So we're not really sure how they're able to do it under their side of the house, because they're not focusing on it. But secondly, though, it's just disingenuous words, right? Because you're not actually able to like back up your like words with any sort of feasible action. Under our side of the house, we get these people back their land. We build a marae where the government literally burns it down, right? We're able to get this change and say we are really, really sorry for what happened. And actually target them and like get them this change. We brought this up really, really clearly from our first speaker. It hasn't been responded to. We made it so clear why this needs to happen and why it's only like this sort of compensation that gets this sort of change, because an apology is never, ever going to be enough. That is why I'm proud to stand.
It was very interesting debating the negating team today, because it seemed like we actually debated against two entirely separate teams, right? Because we had this massive case shift that occurred from initially having this morality trumps finance view, then going all the way towards the opposite end, and having this idea of, nothing matters without finance, right? And it's impossible for an apology to be even passed in the absence of, financial redress for all these past issues, right? So what have we had in this debate? Two main points of clash. Firstly, who impacts wider societal racism and actual perceptions of people of color? And secondly, who gets wider social benefits for everyone, right? So on this first point of clash on racism, right? So they told us that without money, an apology seems disingenuous, and it's basically government saying it doesn't matter. And this came out very late in the debate, right? But just going back right from our very beginning, we had already supported an apology, and literally from first, we had mechanized redress of current inequalities of things like equalizing things like police departments and education from very first. No, it's not the government saying, oh, who cares about minorities? We literally told you from first how we redress these current social inequalities. They ignore that down the entire line, right? The next thing we heard that was a direct contradiction at the core of their case was that white working class and middle class people have this very deep sense of empathy, right? And they want taxpayer dollars to go to, indigenous reservations, things along those lines. We directly after that heard that these white people view poor people as freeloaders, right? And basically don't care about them. They said that they won't care about people like homeless people and drug addicts, right? First of all, they ignored all our material on how past injustices have literally resulted in a present-day class inequality, which means that people of color are more likely to be affected by drug addiction, more likely to be affected by things like homelessness, right? And they actually did their work for us, right? When they told us that trans women and trans people are more likely to be affected by homelessness, and then went on to say directly after that the white middle class will not care about them unless it benefits themselves. They literally told us that's why their entire social policy will not work, because they told us that the middle class and working class people won't care about these people unless they get benefited themselves, right? So what have we seen? We've seen that literally people of colour that have been more disadvantaged are more likely to be affected by things like drug addiction, and they told us this at second. What else have we seen? We've seen that down the line there was a thing where they basically ignored all our content on how improved social programs that reduce poverty for Black people, for people of colour at large, actually have an improved view of them in society without alienating the majority of working class and white people in society, without actually getting those massive harms that they get on their side of the house when Oprah opens up that package of thousands of dollar bills and reparations, right? So what do we also see on our side of the house in terms of social benefits? We saw that we proved from the very first that a policy of reversing current inequality disproportionately helps people of colour, right? This was never substantially challenged, and eventually it was basically cemented on their side of the house when they acknowledged that these historical injustices have resulted in increased poverty cycles for people of colour. They basically conceded that yes, these programs that help these people are disproportionately going to help people of colour, right? Then what else have they told us that was another contradiction at the core of the case? They told us that giving money to too many people means not a big impact. But literally at second, they told us that white people could be broadly supportive of this policy, as money will be given to literally all women and all of the LGBT community, right? That was a core contradiction in their case. They never resolved. They said we get white people on board by giving reparations to women. That's a far greater, expanse of people than they wanted to grapple with. That's why basically they lose their benefits of, getting big chunks of money on their side of the house anyway. And it's a direct contradiction in the case we never saw resolved down the line. Finally, we told you at first that simply there is just a very real need to actually help people that need it, right? We said that it's actually important, we believe, that people, have a necessity to actually survive and maintain a living should receive money rather than those well-off people that are receiving it anyway, right? They basically just ignored this and said oh, it's fine because the majority of people are in poverty. We told you many lines of analysis as to how this actually has very catastrophic effects on society when these people are going to look up and see wealthy people, well-off people actually receiving things like reparations, receiving financial benefits from something that not only has no attachment to their own self-interest and doesn't help them whatsoever, but actually produces resentment against these people. So at the end of the day, we see them endangering thousands of people of colour by basically emboldening all this discriminatory practices, and they also lose all the social benefits they claim to have on their side of the debate. Thank you very much.